Welcome to today's historical deep dive into a man who bent Europe to his will, built an empire from nothing, and whose name still echoes like a cannon shot across the centuries. But what if the myth is just a shadow of the man? What if the iron will we remember was often fueled by desperate gambles and terrifying anxiety? We peel back the layers today, not just on a general or an emperor, but on the raw, flawed, astonishing human being named Napoleon Bonaparte. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand on the Pratzen Heights, December 2nd, 1805. The air bites with a pre-dawn chill, sharp enough to sting your lungs. Below, the great redoubt of the Grande Armée is swallowed by a chilling fog, a thick, white blanket suffocating the battlefield. Your men, exhausted and outnumbered by the combined might of Russia and Austria, gathering across the Goldbach stream, shiver not just from the cold, but from the immense weight of the coming hours. This isn't just another engagement. It's a chess match played with nations as pieces. A gamble for the very soul of Europe. A moment where destiny hangs precariously in the balance, like a dewdrop on a spider's silk. Your plan, codenamed the Lion's Trap, is audacious, terrifyingly simple, and relies entirely on the enemy's predictability. You will feign weakness on your right flank, deliberately drawing their overwhelming force away from the crucial center, these very heights you stand upon. It's a trap sprung with human lives as bait, a calculated risk that makes even your most seasoned marshals uneasy. Some whispered their doubts last night, their voices tight with fear of annihilation. But you silence them with a look, with the sheer force of your conviction. This morning, as the first gray light stains the eastern sky, you feel the familiar coil of tension in your gut, but also the burning certainty that this day will be yours. You know the Allied generals, you know their arrogance, their belief that your apparent weakness on the right is a gift from God. They will take the bait, and when they commit their reserves to crush your flank, leaving the Pratzen Heights exposed, you will strike the undefended center like a thunderbolt, splitting their army in two. This is the core decision of Austerlitz, not just to fight, but to invite disaster on one part of your line to achieve overwhelming victory elsewhere. It's a strategy born of audacity bordering on madness, a belief in your own psychological insight into your opponents that surpasses belief in conventional military strength. Ask yourself, was this stroke of genius born from unparalleled strategic insight? Or was it simply the hubris of a man who refused to accept limitations, daring fate to contradict him? The fog begins to lift, slowly revealing the enemy massing below, moving exactly as you predicted. The trap is set. The cold bites at Austerlitz, but the fog is a thicker shroud. You stand amidst your staff, an island of stillness in the swirling mist. Hours stretch, heavy with anticipation. You know the enemy, confident in their superior numbers, a sprawling coalition army. Believe your right flank is weak, ready to crumble. And you've allowed them to believe it. You've made a calculated feint, a strategic illusion to lure them in. Now, reports confirm your gamble pays dividends. They are pulling troops from their center, massing towards your perceived weakness, attempting to outflank you through the valleys. They make the predictable move. You wait for the opportune moment. The key, you knew, was the Pratzen Heights, the high ground dominating the field. To reinforce their flank attack, The enemy has committed the cardinal sin. They've left this vital plateau thinly defended, almost deserted. It's a trap baited not with cheese, but with their own overconfidence and your deliberate vulnerability. Hidden in the fog, the waiting is a form of psychological warfare, not just against the enemy, but against the patience of your own men. The air is thick with tension, silence broken only by the muffled sounds of distant troop movements and the rhythmic beat of your own heart. You consult your watch, then look towards the sky, waiting for a cue only you seem to anticipate. Then, as if the world itself conspires with your will, the sun begins to pierce the mist, not gradually, but in sudden, glorious shafts of light that slash through the gray. The sun of Austerlitz, it will be called, and in its golden light, the fog melts away from the Pratzen heights. You lift your spyglass, surveying the scene. There it is, the high ground, deserted by the enemy troops, who are now caught in the lower ground, attempting their wide flanking maneuver. They have walked straight into the jaws of your planned assault. A slow smile spreads across your face. The moment is now. You turn to your marshals, sweeping your arm towards the illuminated plateau. The words you speak are simple, yet they carry the weight of destiny. There, you declare, your voice, cutting through the lifting fog, is the field of battle. Observe it well. We shall meet the enemy there. It's not merely an order to advance. It's a prophecy delivered on the cusp of fulfillment. This wasn't just intuition. It was a deep understanding of troop movements, terrain, and, crucially, human psychology. You knew the enemy would react predictably to a perceived weakness, that their desire for a crushing flank victory would blind them to the vulnerability they were creating. Leaving the Pratzen heights open wasn't carelessness. It was a dare, a calculated risk based on the certainty that your opponent would value the idea of turning your flank more than securing the central high ground. It's the difference between playing chess and playing your opponent. Ask yourself, was this pure, audacious brilliance, or a gamble so immense it skirts the edge of hubris? What kind of leader engineers a trap using his own army as bait, relying on the enemy's specific, predictable flaws? It's a move that defines not just a battle, but a legend. A moment of absolute clarity emerging from the fog of war, dictated by a single, unwavering will. Born on a small, wild island, an outsider, marked by an accent that drew snickers from Parisian cadets, you were Napoleon Bonaparte, but to them, you were just the Corsican, a provincial boy adrift in the rigid, aristocratic world of French military schools. The snobbery stung. The isolation was a constant companion, but it wasn't wasted. It drove you inward, into the pages of history, into the campaigns of Alexander, Hannibal, Caesar. You devoured strategy like a starving man, your mind a forge, hammering disparate facts into sharp, tactical steel. While others drilled mechanically, you were fighting ancient battles in your head, learning the timeless language of terrain, timing, and troop movement. Then came the revolution, a hurricane tearing through France, leveling the old world and creating dizzying currents of opportunity. Where seasoned officers fled or fell to the guillotine, you saw a field of possibilities. Rank, once a matter of birth, was suddenly open to talent. Your moment arrived at Toulon. The British fleet, invited by royalist rebels, held the crucial port. Experienced generals dithered, lost in conventional sieges. You, a mere artillery captain, saw the obvious, control the high ground overlooking the harbor, Legulette, and the ships must leave. Your plan was simple, direct, and ridiculed by the experts. But you persisted, your cannons dragged into position, firing relentlessly. The gamble paid off. The British fleet, facing annihilation, sailed away. Toulon was retaken, and you, the ridiculed Corsican, were suddenly a brigadier general at 24. It was a stark lesson in clarity amidst chaos, the power of seeing what others missed. The next test came on the streets of Paris during the Vendémiaire uprising. Royalist mobs, sensing a power vacuum, threatened the National Convention. The Directory, the fragile government, was paralyzed. They turned to you. The order was simple: disperse them. Other officers flinched at the thought of firing on Frenchmen. You didn't. Position your cannons. Load them not with cannonballs, but with grape shot, a cluster of smaller balls that ripped through flesh like a scythe through wheat. A whiff of grape shot, you famously, chillingly called it. The street became a slaughterhouse for a few minutes. The mob broke. The convention was saved. It was brutal, decisive, and utterly effective. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a political statement. You had shown you were willing to use terrifying force to maintain order, to protect the state. Ask yourself, could you have ordered that grape shot? Was it necessary pragmatism in a desperate time, or the first chilling glimpse of a ruthlessness that would define your future? This act, more than any battlefield maneuver, solidified your reputation. A man who studied war not just to win, but to control, who saw the revolutionary chaos not just as a threat, but as the raw material from which to forge a new destiny, using intellect and iron will in equal measure. From the mockery of the Academy to the smoke of Vendémiaire, your rise was a relentless, self-made climb powered by ambition and an almost terrifying clarity of purpose. Italy. It is 1796, and you are sent to command a ragtag, underfed army, the Army of Italy. The Directory in Paris sees it as a sideshow, a place to keep an ambitious general busy, perhaps even to fail quietly. But you see something else, a canvas, a crucible. The Austrian armies facing you are larger, better supplied, following the old rules of war. They expect a polite exchange of maneuvers. You deliver a hurricane. You unleash a terrifying new tempo. Speed, surprise, concentration of overwhelming force at a single decisive point, shattering the enemy line before they can react. Bridges are crossed under fire, mountains scaled in blizzards, battles fought and won in days, not weeks. This isn't just military theory. It's a physical embodiment of your restless will. But your genius isn't confined to the battlefield map. You live among your soldiers. You share their meager rations, listen to their complaints, speak their earthy language, shedding the formal address of the ancien regime. You are seen freezing in the trenches, leading charges personally. This creates a bond forged in hardship, a loyalty deeper than military discipline. They begin to call you the Little Corporal, an affectionate nickname that belies the immense power you are building. Crucially, you understand the power of narrative in this revolutionary age. You bypass the official channels in Paris and publish your own battlefield bulletins. These aren't dry reports. They are thrilling, often exaggerated epics written in stirring prose, filled with acts of heroism, yours and your soldiers. You describe impossible victories, portray yourself as divinely favored, a force of nature. You are not just winning battles. You are crafting a legend, disseminating it directly to the public and, perhaps more importantly, back to your own troops, who read about their own exploits and believe even more fiercely in the myth you are creating. This is perhaps the most profound insight from Italy. Propaganda isn't just for the enemy or the home front. It's a weapon within your own ranks, cementing loyalty and elevating morale to an unstoppable force. The soldiers adore you. You have transformed a dispirited rabble into an instrument of your will, seemingly invincible. Italy becomes a string of dazzling victories. Montenotte, Lodi, Arcole, Rivoli. Treaties are dictated, territories conquered, wealth extracted. You are no longer merely obeying orders. You are acting as an independent power. And back in Paris, the Directory watches your meteoric rise with a mixture of awe, envy, and growing apprehension. This fusion of a man's ambition with the collective spirit of an army, amplified by deliberate myth-making, is unprecedented. Ask yourself, was this necessary to galvanize an army, or the first chilling sign of a leader who would place personal glory above all else? The dust settles from campaigns abroad, but France is a churning sea of discontent. The Directory, a five-headed hydra of corruption and incompetence, bickers while the nation reels. Inflation gnaws at the poor, royalists plot a return, and Jacobins dream of renewed terror. Order is a ghost. The revolution devours its own children, leaving exhaustion in its wake. You, Napoleon, see this chaos not as a threat, but as an invitation. The military hero is needed to become the political savior. Your ambition, a restless engine, shifts gears. Battlefield strategy gives way to backroom calculation. The plot for a coup d'état is hatched, a labyrinthine scheme involving disgruntled politicians and loyal generals. The date is set, 18 Brumaire, year 8 of the Revolution, November 9th, 1799. The plan is simple, yet hinges on performance. Frighten the councils into leaving Paris, then declare a new provisional government under your authority. It begins smoothly. The Council of Ancients, fed lies about a Jacobin conspiracy, votes to move to St. Cloud and appoints you commander of the Paris troops, charged with their safety. The stage is set, but history, like a mischievous playwright, often introduces moments of farce. Arriving at St. Cloud, you attempt to address the Council of Ancients. You are a god on the battlefield, but here, facing elected officials, you stumble. Words fail you. Your military bluntness meets political resistance. You stammer, accusing deputies of being traitors, offering vague threats. It is not the commanding performance you envisioned. The politicians push back, sensing weakness. There are shouts of "down with the dictator," and even calls to outlaw you. Then, you enter the Council of 500, where your brother Lucien Bonaparte serves as president. This is where the situation nearly unravels completely. Deputies, enraged, surge towards you, shouting, jostling. Soldiers rush in to pull you out, and in the confusion, you are scratched, perhaps even struck. Accounts vary, adding to the near-mythic chaos of the moment. Outside, you are shaken, potentially bleeding. The coup teeters on the brink of failure. Your political career perhaps ending before it truly begins, not with a bang, but with a clumsy scuffle in a legislative hall. Here lies a surprising truth. This pivotal moment was saved not by your own charisma or military might directly, but by the quick thinking and loyalty of your brother, Lucien. Seeing the crisis, Lucien leaves the chamber and addresses the troops gathered outside. With dramatic flair, he points a sword at his own brother's chest, vowing to stab Napoleon himself if he ever betrayed the principles of the revolution. He paints a picture of deputies trying to assassinate their hero brother, rallying the soldiers. This is the critical turning point. The troops, stirred by Lucien's words and their devotion to you, march into the chamber. The deputies, scattered by bayonets and the sheer force of military intervention, flee through windows and side exits. The legislature is purged. The coup succeeds, saved by Lucien's theatrical brilliance and the brute force of loyalty. You are now first consul of a new provisional government. Within months, you consolidate power, drafting a new constitution that centralizes authority firmly in your hands. Public plebiscites, carefully managed, endorse your assent. By 1802, you are first consul for life, a position of near monarchical power, cemented by popular vote and political maneuvering. The transition from military commander to administrative ruler is complete. Your battlefield tent is exchanged for ministerial offices, cavalry charges for cabinet meetings. But your vision extends beyond mere political control. You crave order, permanence, a rational structure to replace revolutionary chaos. Your most enduring legacy, arguably, is not etched in stone memorials of victories, but in the cold, clear print of law, the Civil Code of 1804. Known initially as the Code Civil des Français, and later simply the Code Napoleon. You didn't write it yourself, of course. You convened brilliant jurists, Tronchet, Portalis, Bigot de Prémeneux, Malville. But you drove the process with relentless energy, often presiding over council meetings, challenging, debating, pushing for clarity and logical structure. The code sweeps away the tangled web of feudal laws, regional customs, and revolutionary decrees that had made France a legal patchwork. It establishes clear, uniform laws governing property, family, contracts, and civil rights. It enshrines principles of the revolution, equality before the law, secularism of the state, while also reflecting your own conservative instincts, particularly regarding family authority and property rights. It is rational, accessible for its time, and remarkably comprehensive. Consider the sheer audacity. Within just a few years of seizing power, you oversee the creation of a legal framework that would be adopted or influence legal systems across Europe, the Americas, and beyond. This is not the action of a mere warlord. It is the work of a statesman, a system builder operating on a grand scale. Yet it is also imposed by a singular will. This code is a monument to order, logic, and your own vision of how society should be structured. From the grand affairs of state down to the most intimate matters of family and inheritance. It is the blueprint for a modern state, dictated by the man who now embodies its very authority. Ask yourself, was this drive for order a benevolent imposition of rationality, or the mechanism for centralized control necessary for the absolute power you now wielded? The Code, a child of both Enlightenment ideals and Napoleonic pragmatism, is a complex legacy, a blend of progress and control, logic and personal decree. What would it feel like to not only command armies, but to reshape the very legal DNA of a nation, and in doing so, much of the Western world? You are no longer just the general. You are the legislator, the architect of state, leaving your mark on lives yet unborn through the power of law. Notre Dame Cathedral, December 2nd, 1804. The air inside is thick with incense, anticipation, and the weight of centuries. Gold gleams, velvet drapes, and thousands of witnesses, dignitaries, soldiers, citizens, crane their necks, crammed into every corner of the ancient edifice. This is not just a ceremony. It is a statement, a grand, almost unbelievable spectacle designed to legitimize a revolutionary journey. You stand at the altar, clothed in imperial splendor, the gaze of Europe upon you. Pope Pius VII is here, brought from Rome, a living symbol of divine authority and traditional legitimacy. He is present to bestow God's blessing, to place the crown upon your head, echoing the coronations of French kings stretching back 1,000 years. That is the ancient rite, the expected choreography. But you are not a Bourbon. You are not chosen by God or born to rule. You are Napoleon, forged in the crucible of revolution, propelled by sheer relentless will. The Pope lifts the heavy, bejeweled crown, ready to fulfill his historical role. The silence in the cathedral is absolute, electric. Every eye is fixed on the pontiff, then on you. This is the pivotal beat. And in that silence, you act. You reach out, not to receive, but to take. You grasp the crown from the Pope's hands, a ripple of astonishment passing through the assembly. Pius VII hesitates, his expression a mask of carefully controlled surprise and perhaps a flicker of indignation he dare not show. This was not in the script, not the ancient one, certainly, but perhaps not even the one negotiated with Rome. And then, with deliberate, powerful movement, you turn. Facing the congregation, you raise the crown high for all to see, not a gift from heaven or the church, but an object claimed. And then, you place it firmly upon your own head. This single, audacious act is not mere ego or a dramatic flourish, though it is undeniably dramatic. It is a profound declaration, the ultimate expression of your core philosophy, made manifest in purple robes and glittering gold. You refuse to accept power from any external source, not the divine right of kings, not the blessing of the church, not the will of the people codified by others. You claim it yourself. You seize it. You create your own legitimacy, not through inheritance or religious sanction, but through will, through achievement, through force. Consider the sheer audacity. In an era still steeped in tradition, where monarchs derive their authority from lineage and divine decree, you stand as a self-made emperor, telling the world, and the very representative of God on earth, that your power comes from within. It's a move as strategically brilliant as it is breathtakingly arrogant. It silences any suggestion that the Pope is your superior or that your authority is conditional on his blessing. It says, I am here because I willed it, because I fought for it, because I earned it. There's a subtle, almost tragic irony here. While you reject the source of traditional legitimacy, you are still so acutely aware of the need for legitimacy itself that you stage this elaborate ritual. You need the trappings, the spectacle, the presence of the Pope, even as you redefine their meaning. You perform the ancient dance while changing the steps entirely. It's the revolutionary spirit clothed in imperial garb, the ultimate pragmatist, embracing the most elaborate symbolism, but bending it entirely to his own purpose. After crowning yourself, you then crown Josephine as empress, an act of devotion, yes, but also an extension of your created authority. Her legitimacy, like yours, flows from you, from your will, from your power. This moment at Notre Dame isn't just a historical anecdote. It's a window into the very soul of your ambition. It reveals a man who trusted only his own capacity, who believed his destiny was not given but taken. It was a chess move that stunned the board, a thunderclap that declared a new kind of ruler had arrived. Ask yourself, standing there, with the history of France and the weight of Europe pressing in, would you have dared to take that crown? Or would you have bowed your head and received it? What does that single act tell us about the fundamental difference between inherited power and power seized by force of will? A mist lifts from Austerlitz, and you stand truly at the sun-drenched apex of Europe. The victory is absolute, shattering the old order, not just militarily, but conceptually. Treaties are now dictated, not negotiated. Empires that stood for 1,000 years bow before your will. The Holy Roman Empire, that venerable ghost of Rome, is swept away, replaced by the Confederation of the Rhine, a block of states bound to you, reshaping the very map of Central Europe. This isn't just conquest, it's creation. You dispense crowns like favors, installing brothers, sisters, loyal generals on thrones from Naples to Holland, Westphalia to Spain. They are extensions of your will, puppets on a grand stage, meant to solidify your dynasty and enforce your continental system. It appears unassailable, a family empire rooted in military might. Yet, look closer. Is this strategic genius, or is it the first subtle sign of overreach? You treat kingdoms as provinces, ignoring the deep currents of national identity and loyalty that run beneath the surface. A subtle irony blooms here. The very act of installing your own blood creates a fertile ground for resentment and future rebellion among the conquered peoples, and sometimes even within your own family, yearning for independence from your iron grip. Then comes Prussia. Its army, steeped in the legacy of Frederick the Great, is seen as legendary, invincible. In a campaign of breathtaking speed and brutality, you shatter it at Jena and Auerstedt in a single day. It's not just a defeat, it's an annihilation, a demolition of a military myth. Your marshals marvel, Europe trembles. Your cavalry ride through Berlin, a city that once embodied Prussian pride. The speed, the decisiveness, the sheer scale of these triumphs against historically powerful foes solidify an idea, a feeling, both within you and across the continent. You simply cannot be beaten. This is the dangerous fruit of unchecked, unprecedented success. The illusion of invincibility takes root, deep within your own psyche, radiating outwards across the chessboard of Europe. Your strategic brilliance remains undeniable, the execution flawless. But is this power based on enduring structure? Or is it a house of cards held together by the sheer force of your personality and the momentum of victory? Ask yourself, gazing out from the Tuileries across a continent seemingly at your feet, is this the pinnacle of mastery, or the first step onto a path paved with overconfidence? What would you do, standing there, with the world bending to your will, facing no immediate, credible threat? Would you consolidate, or would you push further, testing the very limits of your own perceived power? Yet beneath the glittering surface of your empire, a deep wound festers. You have conquered emperors, humbled kings, redrawn maps with a stroke of your pen. But across the narrow channel, the British Isles remain maddeningly out of reach. Their navy, a wooden wall against your ambitions, mocks your land-based dominance. You stand on the shores of Europe, master of millions, yet impotent against the churning tides controlled by your ultimate enemy. Frustration gnaws at you. a constant itch you cannot scratch with legions or cannons. This unyielding defiance breeds a desperate gambit, the continental system. If you cannot defeat Britain on the waves, you will strangle her on land. You issue decree after decree, from Berlin, from Milan, from the palaces of conquered monarchs, forbidding any nation under your sway, any ally, any subject people, from trading with the British. It is an embargo of unprecedented scale, an attempt to use the vast network of your empire as a single, colossal fist to crush the British economy. You see it as a masterpiece of economic warfare, leveraging your continental power against their maritime strength. You believe you can dictate the flow of goods, the wealth of nations, as easily as you move battalions. But the reality of Europe is not a chessboard. It is a complex, living organism built on centuries of commerce, connection, and necessity. Ignoring the intricate web of traditional trade routes, family ties built on business, and the simple human need for certain goods proves disastrous. Blockades breed smuggling on an epic scale, creating new illicit economies. Resentment simmers beneath the surface of your allies and subject states. Their economies suffer, their ports lie idle, their merchants ruined, all to satisfy your vendetta against an enemy they cannot see and often don't understand. Hardship spreads across the continent like a plague, undermining the very stability you claim to provide. You have imposed your will, yes, but you have also sown seeds of deep unpopularity and resistance, not against France, but against you. This wasn't the calculated strategy of a master planner. It was the furious lashing out of a caged lion unable to reach its true prey. It was an attempt to bend the fundamental rules of geography and economics through sheer force of will, ignoring the inevitable blowback. Ask yourself, when does ambition cease being a driving force and become a blind, destructive obsession? Was the continental system brilliance born of necessity or sheer, unadulterated hubris, a refusal to accept limits? You stand astride the continent, proclaiming victory, yet your every decree reveals a deeper, more dangerous vulnerability, the inability to tolerate any challenge, any limitation, even those imposed by the sea itself. You look east towards Spain. The map unrolls before you, a chessboard of kingdoms and alliances. Italy bent to your will, Austria humbled, the German states rearranged like furniture in a grand hall. Now, Iberia beckons. It seems simple, logical, a clean dynastic maneuver. The Bourbon monarchy is weak, decadent, ripe for replacement. Why not place your brother Joseph on that throne? A trusted face, a family link, another pillar in the empire you are building, piece by piece. Across the continent, you see it as another swift, decisive act, like marching into Vienna or Berlin. Install a Bonapartist king, bring Spain into the continental system, secure your southern flank. It makes perfect strategic sense on paper. But Spain is not Italy, not Austria, not the tidy principalities of Germany. You misread its soul entirely. You see a nation, but you fail to see a people. A people deeply religious, fiercely independent, bound by ancient traditions and a volatile pride you cannot comprehend from the gilded halls of Paris or the disciplined ranks of the Grande Armée. You impose a foreign king, dismantle the Inquisition in a land where faith is life, and expect gratitude, or at least passive acceptance. Instead, you unleash a storm. The response is not a polite governmental capitulation or a traditional army's defeat in a set-piece battle. It is a spasm of furious, brutal, popular revolt that erupts like a volcano across the peninsula. Cities rise up, villages form militias, priests preach holy war against the invaders. It's a diffuse, venomous insurgency, a guerrilla war, a word derived from their own language, guerra pequeña, the little war. Your marshals, masters of grand strategy and massed formations, find their skills useless against an enemy that melts into the hills, strikes from ambush, and disappears before you can retaliate effectively. Every supply convoy is a target, every isolated garrison a death trap, every road fraught with unseen danger. This is the Spanish ulcer, and it begins to bleed your empire dry. You pour hundreds of thousands of your best troops into this grinding conflict. Veterans who should be marching east against Russia or standing guard against Britain. They are tied down, exhausted, decimated by disease, starvation, and the relentless, pitiless violence of the insurgency. This isn't glorious conquest. It's a slow, agonizing drain on your resources, your treasury, and crucially, your reputation. Europe watches as your invincible legions are bled white by peasants, priests, and partisans. The myth of your invincibility begins to fray here in the dusty passes and sun-baked plains of Spain. There's a bitter irony in this. You, the architect of total war, the master of mobilizing national energy for conquest, are now facing a nation that has mobilized itself, not by your command, but against it. You sought to impose your will on a kingdom, but you encountered the unyielding spirit of an entire people. This is a crucial turning point, a subtle yet profound shift in the nature of the wars you fight. Until now, you fought armies, kings, and empires. In Spain, you fight a ghost, a popular will, something intangible that cannot be crushed by cavalry charges or artillery barrages. Your genius for maneuver and battle is impotent against a foe that refuses to stand and fight, preferring instead to peck and harass, to bleed you slowly in 1,000 unseen cuts. Ask yourself, was the decision to invade Spain and impose your brother born of strategic necessity, or was it the first clear sign of overreach, of a hubris that believed any obstacle, any nation, could be bent to your will? What do you do when your grand design collides not with an army, but with the irreducible spirit of a land and its people? You stand on the precipice of a new kind of war, one you are ill-equipped to fight, a war that will cost you dearly and set in motion the events that will ultimately lead to your downfall. The ulcer festers. As power solidifies, the air around you grows thin. The council chambers, once filled with the strategic murmur of diverse opinions, begin to quiet. Ministers who offered cautious advice, generals who spoke uncomfortable truths about logistics or morale, they are met not with consideration, but with impatience. You see hesitation where they see prudence. You hear doubt where they voice reality. One by one, the voices that tempered your ambition are dismissed, or they learn silence is the better part of survival. You begin to surround yourself not with those who challenge your vision, but with those who amplify it. Courtiers nodding agreement, marshals whose loyalty is unquestioned, advisors too fearful to whisper dissent. The intricate feedback loop that once sharpened your genius, the friction of opposing viewpoints that sparked brilliant solutions, is broken. Now you are primarily listening only to echoes, the reverberations of your own thoughts, return to you gilded with flattery. Your brilliance remains undeniable, a force of nature that reshaped continents. But it is no longer tempered by dissenting voices or grounded by external reality checks. The warnings from Talleyrand or Fouché, once grudgingly considered, now sound like the nagging of small minds. You begin to trust only your own instincts, your own seemingly infallible judgment, honed by years of impossible victories. This unwavering self-belief, once your greatest asset, transforms into a liability. Consider the Spanish ulcer, a festering wound that drained resources and manpower for years. Advisors warned against the costly, protracted occupation. You saw only necessity, a simple matter of imposing order. The echo chamber affirmed your view. The reality on the ground, a nation rising in fierce, localized resistance, was a truth you were increasingly insulated from. This isn't merely ignoring advice. It's constructing a reality bubble where inconvenient facts cease to exist. Was this a conscious decision to isolate yourself, or the inevitable byproduct of absolute power? Perhaps both. The sheer weight of command, the constant need to project unwavering strength, makes vulnerability dangerous. But the cost is steep. The very force of will that had propelled your meteoric rise, allowing you to bend nations to your will, now blinds you to your limitations and, crucially, to the rising tide of bitter, unified opposition forming across Europe. An opposition fueled in part by the consequences of decisions made within that insulated bubble of self-affirmation. The man who conquered empires finds himself increasingly imprisoned by his own mind. You see the dispatches arrive, detailing the brutal, unending quagmire in Spain. A wound that refuses to heal, draining men and resources. Simultaneously, reports from across the continent paint a grim picture of your own making. Ports lie silent, trade stagnates under the weight of the continental system, fostering resentment not against Britain, but against the empire that chokes their economies. Yet you dismiss these as temporary setbacks, minor inconveniences on the path to ultimate victory. More insidious is the groundswell you've inadvertently unleashed. In Germany, in Italy, the very spirit of nationalism that propelled France's revolutionary armies is now stirring against your occupation. People who once saw you as a liberator now see a foreign overlord, their languages and customs suppressed by Parisian decree. Your own marshals, battle-hardened men who have stood by your side through 1,000 cannonades, approach with carefully worded warnings, their eyes reflecting genuine concern. They speak of overextension, of exhaustion, of the sheer impossibility of policing an entire continent by force. But their words bounce off a conviction that has hardened into absolute certainty. The tactical genius, the calculated risk-taker of Marengo and Austerlitz is being eclipsed by something else. Your belief in your destiny, once a powerful fuel for ambition, has curdled into an arrogant inability to conceive of failure. Every setback is merely a prelude to the next inevitable triumph. You are convinced that one more victory, one more dictated treaty, will finally break the will of your enemies and secure your empire forever. The caution, the meticulous planning of earlier campaigns, is replaced by an almost mystical certainty that the universe itself is aligned with your will, conspiring to ensure your personal triumph. This is not the pragmatism of a revolutionary leader. It's the rigid certainty of a monarch who has forgotten he can be deposed. You see the growing storm clouds. You hear the distant thunder of discontent. But you stride forward, eyes fixed on a horizon only you can see. utterly convinced that you can command the weather itself. There's a tragic irony in this. You, the architect of modern Europe, fail to grasp the forces of national identity you helped awaken. Ask yourself, when does unwavering determination become fatal delusion? When does belief in one star cross the line into blindness? What would it feel like to hold the reins of an empire and dismiss the pleas of your most trusted advisors, utterly convinced you know better, that the very fabric of reality bends to your will? This moment, more than any lost battle, marks the true turning point. The emperor wasn't just fighting external enemies. He was now fighting against inconvenient truths, and increasingly, against reality itself. The year is 1812. The fragile peace, always more of a tense standoff, shatters. Across the vast, icy plains of Eastern Europe, Tsar Alexander I, your former admirer, now chafes under the chains of your continental system, his pride wounded by your perceived arrogance, your dismissive tone. To you, this isn't mere political disagreement. It's defiance, a deep personal insult echoing across the distance, a challenge to the very hierarchy you have meticulously constructed with blood and iron. You see it not as a diplomatic issue, but a test of wills, your will against his. Warnings arrive like unwelcome guests. Your most seasoned marshals, men who have bled for you from Italy to Austerlitz, counsel caution. They speak of Russia's boundless immensity, a void that swallows armies. They warn of a climate that is a brutal, indifferent enemy. They detail the logistical nightmare of supplying hundreds of thousands of men over impossible distances. These are not whispers of doubt, but the clear-eyed assessments of veterans who understand the limits of human endurance and the fury of nature. Yet, you hear them, process their logic, and dismiss it. Your belief in your own destiny, your sheer, unshakable conviction in your ability to bend reality to your will, drowns out their prudence. You have conquered kings and emperors. Surely, you can conquer geography and weather. The decision crystallizes, forged in the furnace of your ambition and wounded pride. It is a decision born not of cold, strategic necessity. Russia, while annoying, poses no immediate existential threat to your empire, but of a burning need for absolute dominance, a demonstration that no one, not even the Tsar of all the Russias, can stand against your decree, against you. You resolve to settle the matter with a single overwhelming blow, a display of power so immense it will shatter any thought of future resistance. You assemble the Grande Armée. It is a force unlike any seen before in Europe, a colossal engine of war comprising over 600,000 men. They march under your banner, a mosaic of nations, French veterans, Italian conscripts, German allies, Polish volunteers yearning for freedom, reluctant contingents from Austria and Prussia, bound by treaties forged in defeat. It is a testament to the sheer, terrifying reach of your power, the sheer force of your will that can conjure such a host from across the continent. This isn't a campaign of calculated conquest. It is the ultimate act of overreach, a gamble born of hubris. You are not just marching against an army or a ruler. You are marching against the very scale of the world, against the indifferent forces of nature itself. You believe your genius, your administrative prowess, the sheer momentum of your past victories can overcome the vastness, the cold, the logistical impossibilities. It is the moment the master chess player decides he can simply sweep the board clean, ignoring the fundamental rules of the game. The surprising detail here is the personal nature of the conflict for you. While political and economic factors are the stated causes, the continental system, your contemporaries and historians alike point to the perceived slight from Alexander, his subtle undermining of your authority, as the true catalyst. You saw yourself as the new Charlemagne, the unifier of Europe, and Alexander's independence felt like a brother king refusing to acknowledge your primacy, a personal affront demanding a response of overwhelming force, not for the empire's stability, but for your wounded pride. You stand on the brink, gazing east. The horizon is endless, a terrifying blank slate. You are about to commit the largest army ever assembled, a force drawn from across your empire and beyond, to a desolate stage where your greatest strengths, rapid maneuver, decisive battles, may prove useless. You are banking everything on a quick, brutal confrontation, a Austerlitz on a grander scale, forcing the Tsar to capitulate. You do not account for an enemy willing to trade space for time, an enemy whose greatest ally is the land itself and the coming winter. Ask yourself, was this the ultimate expression of tactical brilliance, an attempt to end the continental struggle decisively? Or was it the moment the man who conquered Europe was finally consumed by the belief that he could conquer anything, driven by ego into a confrontation not with an army, but with the brutal, unforgiving reality of the natural world? It is a decision that embodies the dangerous line between supreme confidence and fatal delusion, a line you are now about to cross. The drums beat, the standards unfurl, and the Grande Armée steps off into the void. You march deep into the vast, silent plains of Russia, a colossal force, the Grande Armée, stretching for miles, a river of steel and will flowing eastward. You seek not just territory, but a decisive confrontation, a single grand battle where you can shatter the Tsar's army and dictate peace, just as you have done countless times before. The Tsar, Alexander, refuses to give you this clean, decisive victory. He retreats, drawing you deeper into the heart of his immense empire. Trading space for time, land for attrition, Borodino comes eventually, a bloodbath on an unprecedented scale. A day of horrific, close-quarters slaughter that leaves tens of thousands dead on both sides. You call it a victory. You hold the field. The Russian army retreats. But it is a hollow one. They withdraw, intact enough to fight another day, their will unbroken. You have paid a staggering price for a tactical gain that offers no strategic solution. It is a victory, perhaps, in the language of flags and maps, but the ground itself seems to weep blood, and the silence that follows is heavy with the cost. Then, you reach Moscow. You arrive expecting keys to the city, expecting emissaries bearing terms of surrender, expecting to finally wrap this campaign in the swift, decisive package your genius demands. But the city is not welcoming. It is a trap, set and sprung by the Russians themselves. As you enter, fires begin to erupt, small at first, then coalescing into an inferno. The citizens, following their governor's orders, have abandoned their ancient capital, setting it ablaze rather than let it shelter the conqueror. You find not a capital awaiting its fate, but a deserted, burning shell. This is the profound shock, the moment where your iron will collides with an immovable object. The Tsar does not negotiate. He sends no envoys. He simply lets his sacred city burn. an act of defiance more powerful than any battle. You wait in the ruins, surrounded by ashes and the stench of smoke, for weeks that feel like months. The army, already ravaged by the march, by Borodino, by disease and desertion over the endless distances, begins to fray further. Supplies dwindle, discipline erodes, and then the true enemy arrives, the Russian winter, early and unforgiving. You had planned for armies, for strategy, for the predictable chess game of conquest. You had not fully accounted for a foe that could burn its own heart and retreat into an infinite, frozen landscape, relying on the sheer, brutal indifference of nature. The cold bites deeper each day. The snow begins to fall. Your famous will, which has bent kings, redrawn maps, and driven soldiers to impossible feats, finds nothing to grasp here. It cannot negotiate with frostbite. It cannot outmaneuver a blizzard. It cannot command obedience from emptiness and cold. What would you have done, sitting in the Kremlin, watching your conquest turn to cinders and snow? Was this the ultimate consequence of mistaking relentless ambition for invincibility? You are forced, for the first time in a long time, to confront a reality that simply refuses to yield to your command. The decision is made, not by strategic choice, but by stark necessity. Retreat. The long, agonizing march back begins, a nightmare etched in ice and suffering, where the Grande Armée does not just lose battles, but disintegrates, atom by atom, against the brutal indifference of the Russian winter and a Tsar who would not break. You return from the vast, white silence of Russia, bringing back not an army, but its tattered memory. The core, the iron will forged on 1,000 battlefields, is gone, swallowed by snow and disease. Europe sniffs the air, scenting not fear, but opportunity. The whispers of your vulnerability become shouts across the continent. Prussia, humiliated for years, rises with a vengeance. Austria, calculating and wary, joins the fray, seeing a chance to reclaim lost territories and status. Sweden, under your old Marshal Bernadotte, now Crown Prince Charles John, adds its weight, a chilling twist of fate as a former subordinate turns adversary. The bear, wounded but vengeful, emerges from the snows, and the relentless bulldog of Britain continues its naval chokehold, funding your enemies, a constant shadow on your ambition. A grand coalition, a ring of iron forged from the ashes of your Russian disaster, begins to close around your empire. You scramble, raising new armies from the youth of France. Boys barely old enough to shave, but they are not the veterans lost in the snow. The inevitable clash comes in Saxony, near Leipzig, in October 1813. They call it the Battle of Nations, and the name is fitting. Armies from half a continent converge on this plain. You stand against forces twice your size, fighting with your back against the wall. It is a brutal, grinding defeat, lasting 4 days. Not a tactical misstep on your part, but a simple, crushing reality. You are outnumbered, outsupplied, and cornered. The sheer weight of numbers crushes your valiant defense. Yet, in 1814, a final, desperate flame ignites. As the coalition armies invade France, you fight a campaign that military academies study for centuries. A series of lightning strikes, brilliant maneuvers against multiple converging armies in France itself. It is tactical genius, pure and unadulterated, a master swordsman holding off a mob. But it is a delaying action, a magnificent performance on a stage being dismantled around you. Each brilliant victory is only temporary, as the enemy can absorb losses you cannot replace. Politically, you are isolated. Your marshals are weary, some even plotting for peace at any cost. The Battle of Nations wasn't just a military loss. It was a psychological turning point for Europe. The myth of your invincibility was shattered, replaced by the tangible reality of your weakened state. The tide has not just turned, it's become a tsunami, washing away the very foundations of the empire you built. The idea of your absolute dominance, once accepted with fearful awe, is now openly challenged, hunted down. Ask yourself, was this the inevitable consequence of overreach, or the cruel fate of a genius cornered by sheer numbers? You displayed incredible resilience, fighting like a cornered lion. But resilience, without the necessary resources or political support, is a beautiful, tragic ballet of defeat, played out on the soil of France itself. April 1814. The game is over. You stand on the shores of a speck of dust, the island of Elba, a kingdom of 12,000 souls. A monarch without a throne that matters, a general without an army to command, a mind accustomed to continents, confined to square miles. The marshals have left, the empire is shattered, the Bourbons are back in Paris, clumsy ghosts stumbling through your former palace. This is exile. It feels like death, but your will, that furnace forged in Corsican mountains and revolutionary fires, refuses to cool. You watch the sea, you listen. News trickles in, carried by loyalists, by hopeful plotters, by the very winds that once carried your fleets. France is restless. The white flag of the Bourbons feels like a shroud to many. The promised peace brings economic stagnation. Veterans, your veterans, feel forgotten, their glory dismissed, their sacrifices mocked. The landholders fear the old nobility will reclaim their estates. The king, Louis XVIII, is a well-meaning man, but a symbol of a past France fought a revolution to bury. Discontent, division, a crack in the restored facade, an idea, audacious to the point of madness, begins to form. It is not born of political strategy alone, but of a deep, almost mystical connection you feel with the French people, and, especially, with the soldiers who bled for you. It is a gamble so enormous, it makes Austerlitz seem cautious. Could you, with nothing but your name and your legend, walk back into France and reclaim the throne? It defies reason. It defies logistics. It relies entirely on the enduring power of personality and the fickle heart of a nation. February 1815. Under the cloak of night, you slip away from Elba with a small contingent of loyalists, less than 1,000 men. It's a scene from a forgotten play, desperate and improbable. You land on the southern coast of France, a place where loyalties are uncertain. The first troops sent to stop you, led by Marshal Ney, a man who swore to bring you back in an iron cage, meet you on the road. The air crackles. You step forward, exposing your chest, daring them. If there is one among you who would kill his emperor, you call out, let him do it now. A pause. Then the dam breaks. Cries of Vive l'Empereur erupt. Ranks dissolve as soldiers rush forward, weeping, cheering, kneeling. This isn't warfare. It's a popular uprising catalyzed by one man. The march north becomes a phenomenon. Cities open their gates. Regiments defect en masse. It is not an invasion. It is a homecoming parade, gathering momentum like an avalanche. Louis XVIII flees Paris. You re-enter the Tuileries Palace just 20 days after landing, without firing a shot. The 100 Days, a breathtaking act of self-belief and political seduction. But ask yourself, was this return the height of genius, riding the wave of popular discontent, or a fatal miscalculation, fueled by an ego that refused to accept defeat? The world holds its breath, knowing the precarious peace cannot last. Your audacious return from Elba, an act of pure will defying all logic, sends shockwaves across Europe. Kings who thought they had caged the storm now see the clouds gathering again. Coalitions, the recurring nemesis of your reign, form instantly, driven by fear and a burning desire to finally extinguish the flame that threatens to consume their old world. And so, the stage is set for the final brutal confrontation, a date etched forever in history. June 18th, 1815. The place, a muddy field near a little-known village in Belgium. Waterloo. You face formidable opponents. On one ridge stands Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, the Iron Duke, a man known for his cool head, defensive mastery, and uncanny ability to absorb punishment and wait for opportunity. His army is a mix of British redcoats, Dutch Belgians, and German states, holding their ground with stubborn resolve. And then there are the Prussians, under the aging but fiercely determined Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, who is marching desperately to join the fray. The clock is ticking. You know you must defeat Wellington before Blücher arrives in force. It is a race against time, a familiar scenario. But this time, the margins are thinner than ever before. The battle unfolds with characteristic ferocity. Your initial attacks are powerful. De Erlon's massive infantry columns assault the Allied left. Cavalry charges thunder across the fields. You make strategic decisions that at points seem sound, leveraging your army's strength. La Haye Sainte, the farmhouse key to Wellington's center, is eventually taken after a brutal struggle. There are moments where victory feels tantalizingly close, where the Allied line appears on the verge of breaking. You commit reserves, shifting forces with the practiced hand of a master conductor. Yet things do not go entirely as planned. Crucial orders are misinterpreted or delayed. Marshal Grouchy, dispatched to pursue the Prussians, fails to prevent a significant portion of Blücher's army from reaching the battlefield. D'Erlon's attack suffers from tactical rigidity. Cavalry charges, lacking adequate infantry support, exhaust themselves against Wellington's unyielding squares. You are fighting well, perhaps, but the enemy holds firm, bleeding you slowly, waiting. This is where the unseen hand of fate, or perhaps just the accumulated weight of small errors and the sheer tenacity of your foes, asserts itself. As the afternoon wears on, the Prussian columns, battered but unbroken by Grouchy, begin to arrive on your eastern flank. Their entry turns a difficult battle into an impossible one, stretching your lines and threatening to roll up your army. Wellington's weary troops, seeing their allies arrive, find renewed strength. The moment of truth arrives late in the day. With time running out and the Prussian threat mounting, you commit your final, most precious reserve, the Imperial Guard. Not the entire Guard, a controversial decision in itself, but the core, the legends, the men who have marched with you through glory and hardship. Widely believed to be invincible, they advance up the slope, a formidable, defiant column against the setting sun and a storm of enemy fire. This is the moment. If anyone can break Wellington's line, it is them. But the Allied troops, veterans themselves, stand firm. Volleys of musket fire rip through the elite ranks. The unexpected resistance, the sheer volume of fire, and the knowledge that the Prussians are pouring onto the field combine to create something unprecedented, something unthinkable. The legendary Imperial Guard, your old guard, falters. Then, incredibly, they break. For the first time in their storied history, the Guard turns and flees the field. The cry, "La garde recule," echoes across the battlefield, a death knell for your empire. The sight is devastating. Your most loyal, most formidable soldiers, the very embodiment of your legend, retreating in disarray. The battle is unequivocally lost. This isn't just a tactical defeat, a mere setback on the road to victory. Waterloo is the final, definitive assertion of external reality against your extraordinary will. Your belief in your own destiny, the personal legend of invincibility, carefully crafted over 2 decades of triumphs, is not just challenged, it is utterly shattered on this miserable Belgian field. The world, for the first time, has definitively said no to Napoleon Bonaparte and made it stick. Ask yourself, was it fate or the accumulation of your own strategic missteps and the competence of your enemies that led to this ultimate downfall? What does it mean when even the most powerful will collides with an unyielding reality? You spend your final years on the remote, windswept island of St. Helena. The volcanic rock rises from the vast, indifferent ocean, a cage for the man who once held a continent in his grasp. You live in Longwood House, a damp, uncomfortable dwelling, far from the gilded palaces of Europe. Here, your battles are fought not on muddy fields, but over trivialities with the British governor, Hudson Lowe. Arguments about wine rations, titles, the very layout of your garden. It is a stark, almost cruel irony. The architect of empires reduced to squabbling over bureaucratic slights. This forced inactivity, after decades of relentless motion, becomes its own kind of torment. You fill the hours dictating your memoirs, crafting the narrative of your life, meticulously shaping how history will remember you. You are the man of destiny, betrayed by subordinates, thwarted by circumstances, never defeated by a superior force. In this version, your strategic brilliance is constant, your intentions pure, your downfall primarily the fault of others. It is a powerful, compelling story, yet it rarely acknowledges the role of your own relentless, unchecked ambition. Self-reflection is selective. Painful truths sidestepped in favor of a heroic, albeit tragic, self-portrait. You were driven by an extraordinary will, a force of nature that seemed to conquer fear, conventional thinking, and the armies arrayed against you. You bent nations to your purpose, rewrote laws, redrew maps. But even this monumental will could not conquer the fundamental limits of reality. It could not eternally defy geography, the sheer human cost of endless war, the resilience of other nations united against you, or ultimately itself, when it devolved into blinding hubris. The brilliant calculation that swept you to power curdled into an absolute certainty of your own infallibility. Counsel became an annoyance, dissent an enemy. Your story, culminating here on this lonely rock, is a dramatic, tragic opera of human ambition. It shows the incredible heights attainable when will is focused, sharp, and powerful. It demonstrates how a single individual can reshape the world. But it also reveals the catastrophic depths when that will is allowed to become absolute, deaf to counsel, blind to the world as it truly is, convinced of its own divine rightness. You built monuments, reformed laws, reshaped a continent, a legacy undeniable, etched in stone and law books across Europe. But the cost in blood, disruption, and the eventual collapse back into chaos was immense. Millions died in your wars. The continent was scarred for a generation. Your life asks us profound questions, echoes bouncing off these cliffs of exile. Where is the line between visionary ambition and destructive ego? When does the strength of will, essential for leadership, become the weakness of stubbornness, deaf to reality? What happens when belief in destiny overrides all evidence to the contrary? What happens when the architect of empire becomes convinced of their own invincibility? Your fate stands as a stark reminder that even the most extraordinary human force must eventually confront the unyielding nature of the world, the limits imposed by reality, and the eventual consequences of its own excesses. If history were to repeat itself, if another figure emerged with such a potent mix of vision and will, would we recognize the signs of ambition unchecked? The slow creep of hubris, the fatal belief in one's own invincibility before the sun finally set on their own empire. What does that tell us about our own drives, our own leaders, our own limitations? You yourself once declared, embodying the very principle that both built and shattered your world. Circumstances? I make circumstances. Here, on St. Helena, circumstances finally made you.